Today's land use advisory meeting started. We got the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgement. It's on the agenda if you want to read it over. We currently have the agenda on hand. Any changes, modifications? No?
Move to approve.
All right. Don't need one for that. Thank you, Jerry. On next, though, we will need an approval for a motion for March 19th land use meeting minutes. Looking for a motion on those?
So moved.
Motion? Second. Any discussion? None? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. All right, first we have the City of Forest Lake calculating net density, residential density. We have guest presenters Abby Whitman, Forest Lake Community Development Director, City Attorney Amanda Johnson, and Mayor Blake Roberts. We'll hand it off to you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. First want to thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Blake Roberts. I'm the mayor of Forest Lake. I know many of you are on councils for cities yourself, so I appreciate taking the time of this additional work to be on this committee. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. The Met Council's decisions significantly impact metro communities. Forest Lake is no different. My job, like many of yours, is to listen to the residents and represent their values and interests in the best of my ability. That is why I'm here today. The truth is the density requirement put on Forest Lake by the Met Council is negatively impacting the way the city can develop and the community's desire. Forest Lake is unique in that we are located along the northern boundary of the Met Council Authority, and have large rural areas of the city, significant commercial industrial areas, particularly along I-35 and Highway 61. We have multifamily housing surrounding those commercial areas and seemingly never-ending demand for single-family homes. One of the largest complaints we hear is that single-family lots are too small. To be frank, they are small because the Met Council's density requirements and the way the Met Council has instructed our city staff to calculate that density. As a policymaker like yourselves, I'm concerned by what appears to be arbitrary way the Met Council calculates the math to determine our required density.
Do you want me to move the microphone? Does it matter?
Oh, you're good. We can hear you.
Perfect. Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Johnson. I am the city attorney for the city of Forest Lake. And Abby Whitman is the community development director for the city. She will get into the substance of the presentation, but before we go there, I want to talk about how we got here. So initially what happened was the city appealed our system statement. And we appealed our system statement based on three things: the suburban edge designation, our housing forecast, and our affordable housing requirements. So for those of you who may not know, the suburban edge designation is the community designation for the city of Forest Lake. The housing forecasts are what the Met Council projects are the number of houses will be added, and the affordable housing requirements, it's pretty self-explanatory, it's what we're required to put in for affordable housing. So a question I believe has been posed to this group is, why did we want that appeal to come before you instead of in front of an ALJ? The truth is we know we probably can't beat the Met Council. That's the reality. But we also understand that the unique makeup of this group specifically, the vast majority of you represent your own cities. You are in a unique position to relate to our struggle with trying to meet the Met Council requirements. And our genuine hope is that moving forward, you can help influence future decisions that the Met Council makes to better reflect the needs of the communities that are being required to follow Met Council rules. So the city and the Met Council entered into a stipulation, and we resolved the housing forecasts and we resolved the affordable housing requirements. We won't be talking about those items today. Today, we will be talking specifically about the suburban edge designation, and more specifically, the density requirement for a suburban edge, which is 3.5 units per acre. We want to talk about the most boring subject ever, math. So we want to talk about the math. How does the council get to 3.5 units per acre? We entered into a stipulation with the Met Council that also removed our appeal for the suburban edge designation. That's why this is coming before you as a presentation by the city versus in a more legal format of an appeal. And the reason that we did that is because we were told that we could not appeal the math, the 3.5 units per acre. We didn't have a mechanism to talk about that, absent doing it in a presentation form. In fact, there is actually no ability for a city to appeal, object, or really meaningfully engage in how the math is done for the density calculation for any city. Shortly after filing our appeal, Met Council staff provided new guidance to the city that changed the math. Previously, land that was required to be used for public stormwater ponds was not permitted to be removed from the land calculation for density requirements. Within the last few months, that has changed, and now publicly owned stormwater ponds can be removed. The Imagine 2050 land use plan states on page 31 that stormwater ponds cannot be removed, but the new guidance from the Met Council, the MUSA implementation guidelines, states that they are exempt. Problem is, this is not memorialized in a way that would prevent different guidance from being provided at some point in the future that would pull back those storm ponds or come up with a completely new calculation for the map. For cities like Forest Lake, where we have clay soils and really poorly draining soils, and then because of the watershed, regulations that we also have to meet, the result is we have giant stormwater ponds. And I'm sure there's a few of you that can, from your cities know that there's areas where you just, due to the retention, due to all the different factors, stormwater ponds take up a giant area. While we appreciate that the public stormwater ponds are removed, I would note that that does not include homeowner association or property association maintained storm ponds. And as most people who work for a city know, from a cost perspective, you often want that property to remain with an association from a cost savings perspective, but it is absolutely a part of your public stormwater infrastructure and facilities. In addition, we are not able to remove the land area for local roads. So any local roads that are created as part of the project, the land for those roads is not removed from the density calculation. And I would note that that is a difference between new development and existing development, where the roads already exist and you're coming in and you're doing some sort of an infill. You don't have to count that road, we do. Ultimately, we chose to drop all of our appeals to be given the opportunity to present to you. We want to talk about the arbitrary way that this density calculation currently exists. Abby is going to walk through a real life example that just happened in Forest Lake, a development that was approved 2 weeks ago. So it's very fresh and showing you the dramatic difference that removing different lands results in a total net density without changing the project at all. The Met Council's current math remains arbitrary by removing only public stormwater ponds and refusing to remove land used for local roads and privately owned stormwater ponds, as part of a new development. To be frank with you, this math lacks good faith cooperation with the cities, and it fails to recognize that not every city is similarly situated. Forest Lake's community and the developments that have been approved over the past 10 years have been negatively impacted by Met Council's map.
So I also want to extend my appreciation for this opportunity, at least to speak today. I am Abby Whitman. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Forest Lake. We did distribute handouts of this material. That's a little bit in narrative format. Your takeaway later on, if you're just chilling out at home, want to read, think about all this. That's what we all do in there, right? But really today, as Amanda had said, the intent for us, our goal is to show you one community's net density calculation and how we end up with different results that dramatically impact kind of not just the development itself, but overall our community character. This is a real life example of where you have significantly different density calculations within the exact same development, where the development characteristics don't change. But those equations change, as Amanda had said, those new storm ponds being netted out, but some local roads for some developments, but not others. What I'm gonna show you is this increases density, not because there's more homes. It's because the exemptions allowed have changed. This that I'm gonna show you is one example of how this is affecting a community like Forest Lake. But in Forest Lake, it is happening on every single family residential development that we have. We're also gonna just show how road right-of-ways are integral parts of public infrastructure systems, regardless of their classification. And then we're lastly here to ask you as members of the LUAC to push for greater oversight and involvement in the map, right? To really ask the questions and try to figure out if we're mapping the right way. What we really hope is you'll consider asking the Met Council to net out all public infrastructure, all the roadways, all the sidewalks, all the trails, all the storm ponds and utilities. Houses can't be built there, and so we assert that that's not really developable land area. And then lastly, we're really asking that you push this presentation on to the Community Development Committee and the full Met Council as a hope to memorialize a more fair and accurate equation for density calculations now and through the entirety of the plan. And Amanda, you can see on that slide right there, just a little bit of background for reference. The city's 2040 comprehensive plan, approved by the city, approved by the Met Council, we have been implementing it. A large part of our future land use plan guides land for low to medium density residential. This is our kind of our emerging suburban single family neighborhoods at a minimum of 3 units per acre. And what we did is we aligned that 3 units per acre minimum density on all of our density, citywide density requirements with our future land use district of that low to medium density residential. What we anticipated is a large amount of single family growth in that low to medium density residential district at 3 units per acre. And if that's the only residential development we had for 10 years, we knew we'd be able to achieve our overall community density. We have a corresponding zoning district called the MXR1, the Mixed Residential 1. And in that district, at the turn of our comprehensive plan, our zoning district minimum, our lot minimum was 12,000 square feet. So simple math, you divide 43,560, the square feet of an acre, divided by 12,000, we're at 6.2 units per acre. That's a gross density. But we kind of thought, you net out a few things, you end up with 3 units per acre. Our previous developments were not able to achieve 3 units per acre. So in 2020, the city did amend that MXR1 zoning district. Again, the biggest zoning district that aligns with our low to medium density residential district. And we now have a minimum of 7,500 square feet per single family lot. Our new gross density was 5.8 units per acre. And even so, using the Met Council math, we cannot get subsequent developments to meet the 3 units per acre. So even though we do have the ability to exempt a lot of things, we're still not able to get there. And to most people, the math doesn't math, right? You're thinking, how do you get to 3 units per acre? It should be easy. But as Amanda said, Forest Lake is at least unique in it with some environmental characteristics. And I don't think, looking around the room and seeing where some of your communities are, we're not entirely unique. You probably have wetlands or poor draining soils or other bedrock, whatever it may be. You have other factors that are challenging development. We have environmental factors that prohibit linear infrastructure development. We cannot just go through our storm ponds or through our wetlands. Those wetlands and those poor draining soils are really affecting the design of these neighborhoods. And then also those ancillary development requirements, those roadways, those stormwater ponds, those public infrastructure, they're eating up more developable land. So the next slide, the Imagine 2050 density analysis came out, I think this was maybe in the fall or spring of 2024. And that analysis indicated that emerging suburban edge communities, so that's what Forest Lake is classified as right now and in the 2040 plan. The density analysis said these communities aren't meeting their density requirements of 3 units per acre. I think if you were on the LUAC at that time and involved, you heard that. The Met Council's answer was to the issue was to increase our density. And we went from 3 to 3.5 units per acre. And in this document, it says that the Met Council is going to work in collaboration to achieve density requirements, to assure that these new density requirements were manageable. So one more on the background. Advance it, Amanda, thank you. In the fall of 2024, when the Imagine 2050 draft plan came out, the city submitted comments. They were, a letter is included in your packet. These are from the former mayor, Mara Bain, and at that time, we did express our concern for the new community designation, as well as the increased density requirements. The letter not only stated our concern for designation and density, but how density is calculated. At that time, as early as the fall of 24, or even in the spring when that density analysis came out, we're like, hold up, there are issues here, and now we've got more because we've got to increase our numbers. So at the time, we did request that the Met Council consider exempting storm ponds, roadways, and any other infrastructure improvements. And we're very pleased that the Met Council did not elect to increase our density to 4 units per acre, which was originally proposed. But there's still no clear pathway for how we're going to achieve that even 3.5 units per acre when we're unable to achieve our 3 units per acre. So it was 3 units per acre were kind of, all the exemptions were in published guidelines that were included as early as 2015. Some of those copies we showed in your packet as well. So the Imagine 20, as Amanda said, the Imagine 2050 plan itself has the exemptions in there. New MESA guidelines show that storm ponds can now be exempted, but the plan still states that they can't. We really wanted to bring this presentation to you as a means to say, okay, we're already changing those exemptions before the plan is implemented. Is there an opportunity to reevaluate what are some of those other reasonable exemptions? So the rule changes have impact, and that's what we really were here to show you today. Amberley Woods, as Amanda said, this is a recently developed or recently approved plat in Forest Lake. In fact, I think I saw the trucks out, I think they're starting dirt work on Monday. This is a 38.92 acre site. This is a very typical Forest Lake property, and maybe in a lot of your other communities, that 40 acres from the public land survey system. Usually they're boxes more than rectangles, but this one's a box or a rectangle. This 40 acre site though is very typical of what we're going to continue to see and what we are seeing. So this is guided for that low to medium density residential that I was talking about with a minimum density of 3 units per acre. It can go up to 6. But this is also a zoning district that allows for single family homes and attached townhomes up to 8 units. So you think the single family would be close to that 3, the attached townhomes closer to that 6, right? That's where you kind of have that spread. We have 56 single family homes in there and a mixture of lots that are 55 feet wide and 65 feet wide. The gross density is 1.44 units per acre. So when Amberley Woods comes to, or any developer comes to a city, we look at just gross density at first and we're like, this is low, let's see where we can start netting things out. So Amberley Woods is interesting in that it's no different than any other piece of property really in Forest Lake, is that it's pockmarked with wetlands. I understand that this might not be the best, but anywhere there's a red outline, that's a wetland. And where there's a crosshatch right next to that, that's a buffer. There's 6 acres of wetland and 9 acres of wetland buffer. And weirdly, we have high dry land in the center of some of our wetlands, so there we had developable acreage that you can't access. Using the standard exemptions, again, in the Thrive 2040 and the Imagine 2050 plan, that historical guidance of what can be netted out, we take out those wetlands and those wetland buffers, and 56 units, now on 25 developable acres, is only having a net density of 2.41 units per acre. We're still not meeting that 3. So when we are working with a developer like this, we start to talk about where can we get the 3. And in this circumstance, the place that we got to the 3 was 2 different tools. One's a planned unit development, which I'm sure many of your communities use for all sorts of different reasons. But what that does is that is a kind of a breaking of the rules. It's the flexibilities to help creative design. But what it is it's not meeting the minimum standards. So on Amberley Woods, in order to get that development density up higher, we ended up having to approve a development where 45% of the lots don't meet our minimum of 65 feet wide and 7,500 square feet. So it's not a crazy big numbers here. We're not talking about huge properties. These are fairly still, I would say, reasonably sized, smaller single-family lots in a suburban edge community, right? We're not a suburban community. We're not an urban community. These are on the edge of a community. So it's important to note, we zoned land to be consistent with the comp plan, right? We have a comp plan of the low to medium density residential district of 3 to 6 units per acre. We redid the zoning district to get at a gross density of 5.6. And when you're netting out wetlands and wetland buffers, we still have neighborhoods that 50% of the lots can't just meet the minimums and arguably have a harder time conforming with the comp plan. It really, to us, isn't the most reasonable that almost 40 acres of land in a community the Met Council recognizes as not fully suburban, that we can't get to that 3 units per acre, and the only way we can is to have lots as small as 6,500 square feet. So what we ended up doing with Amberley Woods, if you'd advance one more slide there, Amanda, we ended up looking at the east side of Amberley Woods. You kind of can see the wetlands through the center of the property, breaking up the property. You can also see where Greystone Avenue was supposed to extend through. They wouldn't have been able to get many lots on Greystone Avenue. So what we did is we looked for a creative solution and we made an ask. Hey, do you want to give us some parkland, right? Parkland can be exempted. Public parkland is another exemption. But in order for them to be able to have a sufficiently sized development, for them to not build Greystone and be able to afford Greystone and some lots off of it, this ended up with the entire east half being dedicated to us. 6.21 acres of upland in that area is going to be dedicated to the city. That's well in excess of our parkland dedication requirements, which would have only been about 3.8 acres of upland. So the net developable acres, omitting wetlands, buffers, parkland and open space, we now have 17 acres. So over half the land is netted out. And the new density is 3.4 units per acre. So this is great, right? We're finally over our 3 units per acre. But we had to do that with excess parkland dedication and nearly half of the lots not conforming with our zoning code. This is every single one of the developments we have in Forest Lake. All those wetlands are being farmed, but the minute they stop being farmed, now we've got to work around them with our urban development. So I think it's awesome we finally got there with Amberley Woods. But remember in the beginning when I said in our current comp plan, we're finding a lot of land for that low to medium density residential at 3 units per acre. In the thought that that's the only place that develops in the future, we'd be meeting our city-wide of at least 3 units per acre. On that premise, in Thrive 2050 in the comp plan that we're gonna develop, and if we go to 3.5 units per acre, and we consider adjusting the minimum density in the zoning district or this future land use district, the 3.4 units per acre for Amberley Woods will not be achieved. And I ask all of you, where else are we to find land to develop on this site? The only place we can do it is by adjusting those lots even smaller. So, all of that being said, one of the things that we have consistently asked for is the consideration of netting out additional lands. Now, Amberley Woods, the next slide, we look at, we're able to net out storm ponds. So Amberley Woods preliminary plat was approved, and by the time the final plat came through, the new MUSA guidelines that were allowed to be implemented immediately allows us to net out storm ponds. And our density now on Amberley Woods is 3.393 units per acre. So this is great, right? We get almost a whole nother lot per acre just by the things we're netting out. We did not add another lot at all. Those calculations are what's factoring how we're getting that density. But somehow, without changing that, we still have a development where just a few short months earlier had a half unit density or a unit density less than it did or greater than it did before. So we're happy with those new exemptions, but we still don't think that it goes far enough. We really still would like the Met Council to consider netting out all public infrastructure. Additionally, as Amanda said, it just raises concerns when these policies change midstream, what those impacts can be. We were halfway through a development. We had to commit in preliminary plat phase because those are true entitlements. We had to commit to acquisition of 6.21 acres of parkland to be able to get our density up there, but now we're actually closer to 4 when we're netting out those storm ponds. So those midstream policy changes can affect. Now that being said, the development didn't change, still 56 lots, but we may have been able to have a development where maybe not 45% of the lots don't conform. You know, one of the things that I had written here is just these indiscriminate changes. Feel like it's for the benefit of the community and it's great, but really when it comes down to it, these policies don't feel like a benefit to the community. So we keep asking you to consider all of the infrastructure exemptions for the Met Council to consider more than just stormwater ponds, because you can show how it's increasing density. Now we're looking at the next slide that shows taking out road right-of-ways. So when we look at road right-of-ways, we acknowledge that the Met Council considers these developable areas. The argument is this serves the neighborhood, and that's gonna help us get smaller blocks, narrower streets, attached housing, and more compact development. And we got to that without netting out the roadways. It works in some places, but not everywhere. This is what we get when we're trying to apply that cookie cutter approach to every community. It doesn't work the best, at least for Forest Lake and other car-centric communities, right? These roadways are integral to our community as a whole. This is a community that doesn't have consistent public transportation. And we don't even have Uber or Lyft, right? Like this isn't a place where you could just hop on a bus at the end of the street or call somebody up even. You're gonna have a car. People are gonna own cars and we need places to put them. And that's a challenge on tiny lots and tiny roadways. So these roadways aren't just exclusively serving though the neighborhood. They provide community-wide connectivity. So Amberley Woods is a really good example because this is a missing puzzle piece for the developments to the north and to the south, and arguably if there wasn't wetlands there, it would have been to the east as well. This connects these neighborhoods, giving them multiple access points for, this gives access points for those neighborhoods. This isn't just though about cars, right? This is about our pedestrians. These are all gonna be connected with pedestrian amenities, and that helps put residents on foot and kids on bicycles, and that helps enable a healthier community. There's also, Amberley Woods is a very significant utility connection from the north to the south through that, what was gonna be Greystone Avenue, that's gonna open up almost 150 acres for future development. Just as a crow flies, it's a half mile away, right? This project is serving something a half mile away. That's just water pressure, water availability, and capacity. But most critically, public safety. It's not just for this neighborhood, but also for fire protection. We are now in neighborhoods where we have houses that are 15 feet apart. If one of those goes, we need to make sure that our public safety can get from all these neighborhoods in, and so that it doesn't spread through a community-wide basis. All these things are happening in the right-of-way, in the 60-foot wide. We've got our sidewalks, we've got our utilities, we've got our parking, we've got our people hiking or walking and biking. All of that, our fire protection needs, all of that is happening in this critical public infrastructure. So if, arterial roads and collector roads serve a regional function, and storm ponds, like wetlands or steep slopes, have a greater public purpose, what about the ancillary activities that are happening in this right-of-way? And can we really say that they're helping serve the local community and when they're also meeting other regional goals? When you take out wetlands, buffers, open space, parks, stormwater ponds, and all exempted because of their significance, right, and importance to the public, we take out roads, we have a whole different density. Now Amberley Woods, if you take out all of those things, is 5 units per acre. The development didn't change, right? It's just about the math. It's more in line with our gross density, it helps us plan a little bit better in the long run to understand how can we achieve those minimum density requirements. Again, we didn't add a single home to Amberley Woods. We're just changing the math. But what we did is we also, in Amberley Woods again, have 50% of the lots that don't meet our minimum standards. And those minimum standards were designed to align with the comp plan future land use. We're just not able to get there. So just a case study summary as shown, we went from starting out at 2.4 units per acre, 45% of the lots not conforming. We got a really nice parkland exemption. It's 6.21 acres of upland, but it is littered with wetlands. We don't know what we're gonna do with it yet. That was a nice ask, and that was a really great thing that the developer said, sure. That got us over our 3 units per acre, but we're still not at 3.5. And I understand we can find 3.5 community-wide elsewhere by balancing out those land uses. But at the same time, if we're not able to achieve 3 units per acre or even 3.5 in our single family, we've got to reevaluate what we're doing. We've got those stormwater pond exemptions that are great right now. That's bringing us up a little bit more. But if you really are looking at wetlands have public purpose and parklands have public purpose and storm ponds have public purpose, why don't road right-of-ways have the same public purpose? And why aren't we looking at that calculation at really what is happening here is that we do have Amberley Woods that's more like 5 units per acre versus that 2.4 that it came in at. So this is just one case study. And depending on what the exemptions allow, the math that's in place today, the Met Council math that's in place today, or future density calculations, it changes dramatically what those numbers are. And we, again, didn't just add more units. We couldn't add more units. I mean, we can keep going smaller, but there's only so many tiny houses on the edge of a city that, in the northern metro, that we can keep building that people want to live in. So, in summary, the city recognizes and supports the importance of regional planning. We believe it's important, though, to acknowledge that not all communities are created equally. Communities across the region differ dramatically: geography, infrastructure, environmental constraints, development patterns, and character. And these are the things that residents expect and value. Because of those differences, regional policies need to have real flexibility. We want to meet shared goals. We want them, though, in ways that also help reflect the unique local characteristics and the unique local realities. One of our greatest challenges is how this net residential density is calculated. Under the current approach, where we're not exempting association storm ponds, which will become public storm ponds eventually. I think we all have seen that in our own communities where eventually an association goes away or they can't maintain it or the expense gets too much and then the watershed district steps in and then eventually the city ends up with it, it feels like. You know, with those not being able to be excluded and local roadways not being able to be excluded, we just feel like we're not taking in all the public infrastructure components as a reality. And what that really means is it's the same number of units. They just need to be concentrated on a smaller amount of land. The practical result is development patterns that are increasingly smaller lots and tighter neighborhood layouts. And we are meeting our regional density requirements, but it's really challenging in a community like Forest Lake where we don't have some of those other urban amenities to help meet some of those other regional goals. We're not asking to avoid growth. I don't know if Blake's gonna say it, but we welcome the rooftops. Like we really do want to bring residents to our community. It's a great community. We're not asking for any sort of special treatment. We're really simply asking that the Met Council reconsider what density truly looks like in the suburban edge communities and whether the current approach to net residential density calculations appropriately affects the realities on the ground. We're asking you to reconsider those calculations and whether the road right-of-way areas should be exempted in the future. And we also ask that you would consider sending this presentation on to the Community Development Committee and the full Met Council for their further discussion and consideration. I thank you for your time, your attention, and your willingness to hear just our perspective. And I'll let Blake say a few last words.
Thank you, Abby. And thank you everyone for allowing us for this time and present this information. Hopefully you can see how practical application of the math the Met Council uses to determine density calculation has a real lasting impacts on local communities. While Met Council policies may satisfy density targets on paper, they often do not reflect the character and expectations of communities like Forest Lake. Forest Lake is a historic standalone community in the region that eventually grew outward to meet, not a community that was simply developed as an extension of the urban core. People choose to live in Forest Lake because of the lakes, the surrounding woods, grasslands, 2 state and wildlife management areas, and the connection to nature that still exists here. This community is where residents move specifically because it feels out of the city, where people can still hunt, fish, enjoy open spaces, and experience a different way of life. Forest Lake is not against growth. As Abby mentioned, we want the rooftops. Commercial follows rooftops. That's tax base for us. If anything, I'm being criticized sometimes in our council being too pro-development. So this council is very pro-development, and we want as many residents to move and enjoy the great community that we have in Forest Lake. We are asking for a more balanced and flexible approach and recognize that the one-size-fit-all policies are not always equitable or appropriate outcomes for every community. Excluding all stormwater ponds and roadway areas from density calculations would provide communities with greater ability to design neighborhoods that accommodate growth while still preserving natural character, an open field, and environmental qualities that residents value and expect when choosing to live in communities like Forest Lake. Again, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Any questions?
Can I have some comments? Like I agree with you guys from Forest Lake on a number of issues here. This inherently one thing government does that just drives me crazy is, but it's not wrong, is their attitude that one size fits all. Now I sit on Carver County's Board of Adjustment. We give out variances. We have to give out variances all the time because the law doesn't fit every situation. In your case, the state has all these laws about wet areas and this and that. I don't see why the Met Council should not include them in your planning, not to include them in the way you were describing that. I deal with that in the township. I see your point exactly. And plus, if you're gonna have a development, you gotta have roads. counting the roads as part of that makes no sense to me either. That should be exempted too. So those issues that you talked about, I perfectly agree with you on those. I know the Met Council has a job to do, and it's not easy, of course. They got 3,500 people working on it, I think, every day. So it's a big task, and trying to plan things is not easy, I'm sure. However, you're right about soil. If you're gonna have all these drainage things, you gotta have the soil for it. Not everybody has sandy soil. Where I live is very clayish. I know what it's like for drainage, so on that issue too, I think I'm on your side. Let's see. And I don't think having to cook the books to come with the outcome you want is always a good policy. It should be more straightforward and upfront, so. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jerry. Sean?
Well, a few comments and questions, I think. One, I received a presentation a while ago, and Met Council staff should correct me if I'm misremembering this. I thought we had a mechanism to like average density between multiple plats. Like you have townhomes to the north of this development. Through that plat monitoring program, don't you get some partial credit for the greater density to the north, or was that already used to sort of subsidize lower density in that plat?
The city of Forest Lake is not in the plat monitoring program,
Okay.
and it would be off the plat, so I'm not familiar how necessarily the averaging would work with something that pre-exists.
Okay, well, yeah, I guess my comment would be that seems like one mechanism that could address some of these concerns. Overall, just my comments on your presentation. I think, like, you raised some good points. I'm from Richfield, where we have higher density, but at the time Richfield built out, we were the suburban edge at that time. We admittedly do have very sandy soil, so I cannot relate to the difficulties of the clay soil, and I recognize that's different. I don't feel super strongly on whether these things should be exempted or not, but it does seem like if we allowed you to exempt local roadways and stormwater ponds, the actual number that you need to hit would have to be much higher. Because it does seem like the actual result here, in terms of the lot size, is appropriate for areas that we want to service as part of the urban district or the urban service area. Whether we get there with a low number and more exemptions or higher number and fewer or greater exemptions seems sort of subject to debate. I think one thing that struck me, I see almost no justification for exempting cul-de-sacs from the calculation because they exist almost exclusively, they're de facto private roads for those houses. I do see a valid argument when it comes to through streets, and I do worry that by not allowing us to exclude right of way at all for those local streets, that we're disincentivizing connectivity within neighborhoods. I was glad to see that you're including connectivity to the north and south through that plat you talked about. But the main concern I have with your presentation that just felt a little bit misleading was you continue to cite that your zoning code, you had to approve a bunch of lots that were not conforming with your zoning code, but you control your zoning code. You could have a lower minimum, and in fact, it seems like to comply with the goals of council policy that you should have a lower minimum. And I appreciate your statement that this is unique. It's not Minneapolis or Richfield or some of the other cities here, but in fact, if you need inspiration on how small lots would look at Forest Lake, you could look at Forest Lake. Almost the entire traditional town of Forest Lake is 7,500 square feet or less. So it does seem like a choice on your part to prefer very large lots. And I think the Met Council has a valid position in wanting to discourage that for the sake of having reasonable sewer service for the metro and reasonably serving this area. So you've definitely given me personally good food for thought on the right of way, what might perhaps should be exempted. But I would encourage you to just think about lower lot sizes, especially as you look forward to the next 10 years. Because I think you've got good support for it, you have a beautiful city, and I'm glad you're finding ways to make it work, but I hope you continue to look towards smaller lots.
Thank you, Sean. Bill?
Just a couple questions. Historically, has the Met Council ever not calculated streets or right-of-way?
Mr. Chair, council member, or committee member, we initiated the plat monitoring program in the early 2000s. That was in partnership with Metro Cities at that time. And that's when we were developed the methodology for how we calculate net density. And the council has never excluded local roads as part of that, because they're serve the neighborhood, and that was part of that negotiated process. Over the years, we have made some additions to what is excluded, essentially on a 10-year cycle. Each time the council adopts a plan, then we relook at our policies to be sure that are we advancing the goals of the new regional plan. So the last decade that we updated these guidelines, we excluded a couple of other things, or how we addressed, say, lots of record on Lake Shore, for example, that did not have room for a backup or a septic. Some other, specific exclusions that we're seeing with some other elements. So, but we've never excluded local roads as part of that process.
And just a comment, it would be a policy change, I realize, for you, but stormwater catch basins, for them to even be part of associations don't have the capacity to dredge them or clean them out when they fill up. So I find it somewhat, I'm surprised that the city doesn't have a policy that all stormwater is city-owned public.
I'm not sure if I can comment. We do in our single family, most single family residential districts, but there are circumstances where they are privately owned.
Okay.
Lana?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Bill to raise the question about why do you have privately owned, why are you going into a development where you're going to have privately owned wetlands, and ultimately they're going to come back to your control, like you stated. In our city, we had a privately owned pond, and it has come back to the city. So why not take that into consideration and do the legal claiming it as public wetlands, and you could achieve the same thing you're asking just by taking accountability for it to begin with. One of the other questions I had, you talked about 50% of the lots not meeting your 2040 comp plan. That seems significant enough to ask the question, how could you get more than that to actually meet your comp plan requirements? I think you're asking not to challenge the layout and trying to grab at other exemptions to actually get you to that. And I just wonder why you aren't assessing 50% of the things actually aren't meeting your comp plan to begin with. If I understood you correctly when you said that.
To achieve the number of lots, to be able to achieve the 3 units per acre, we have to make our lots smaller than our minimum of 7,500 square feet. So we would argue that 7,500 square feet is still a relatively small single-family lot in a car-centric community like us. On a lot like that, we're getting our standard 2-car garages, maybe a 3, but we also are 15 feet from the next house. So we're really trying to get a lot on a property, and going much smaller than that is kind of difficult, and we're not finding that is what a lot of the residents or future residents want.
Is your 55 by 65 lot requirement just in particular areas of your town? Is it a requirement for any undeveloped land? Because I think Sean's point about you have a nice city, you have a lot of neighborhoods that are less than that. How and where do you set that requirement?
But we don't get that exemption from what has been historically developed at a very, Sean, is correct. Our urban core, our old Forest Lake is, some of those lots I measured the other day, they're down to 5,000 square feet. We don't get any sort of density credit for that. We only get on what's the new expanding, and so that new expanding is a minimum of 3 units per acre. That's our single-family residential districts.
And that's what's currently set in your comp plan now, your 2040 comp plan.
Correct.
Dan, go ahead.
Just a question on how this net residential density calculation is done. As I seem to recall, it is, and that gets to, I think, the point that was just discussed, it applies to projected areas of development in order to meet the growth requirements as are projected. And I believe it's across all residential types. And then, and doesn't include any commercial, that's just automatically exempted out,
That's correct.
right? And so
Just
it's
residential
just
density.
residential, right? Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And the reason I mention that is because we are in Roseville a urban edge community, and our guidance was, I think, 10 units an acre, now it's 14. And our lot sizes, minimum lot sizes for new developments are very similar to what your standards are. In fact, we used to have an 11,500 square foot standard, and that has gone down. I think now we're closer to what you were kind of defining in your materials. And we're able to meet, or we think we're able to meet, our projections at the 10 or 14. I guess we have to do the evaluation for the 14 standard, but so that part about averaging across all of the projected residential development sites is key. Because we've certainly done a fair amount of work, even before these standards were in place. Certainly we had a fair amount of multifamily in Roseville and have continued to make sure that we're allowing for that. We've done extensive updates to our zoning code to provide for mixed use in a lot of areas so that you can get residential on what have been guided as commercial areas, and that helps with those calculations. But I guess the point being is that I think the 3.5 doesn't necessarily seem unreasonable unless you only apply it to a single family development, and then it can seem very unreasonable, but you haven't taken into account that you're averaging this across all of the multifamily guided areas and things like that. And so I think that's important to consider here as well, and I tend to agree with Sean that perhaps as the exemptions increase, the target might also go up, and so that it may not get you where you want to go necessarily. I think we were fairly thoughtful in the process of the Met Council came to the LUAC to ask our insight into the change from the 3 to the 3.5 and other changes through that process. And I think we did have a lot of discussion about that, a lot of questions were asked, and I won't say that this body was unanimous in our point of view on it, but the general perspective was to support the changes because of all the different perspectives that come to the table in a committee like this. So I just wanted to give you some of that perspective of how we were involved in some of those decisions early on, my own community's challenges and abilities to meet that based on the averages. And the other thing is just in terms of the sort of the stormwater handling areas, certainly if you've got high and dry areas in the middle of wetlands, I can understand that is completely difficult to plan those as developable, and I wonder if how we account for those in the Met Council standards, and so that'd be an interesting conversation to follow up on. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about the streets, the local streets exemption, and we also deal with the private stormwater aspect because a lot of times, for instance, a development may put in an underground tank, and that's on their property, and they're responsible for maintaining it. We've required it as part of either the watershed and or city requirements, but it's on private property, and so there's all these things that enter into it, and I think certainly more discussion can make sense, but I'm not necessarily of the point of view that we're totally unreasonable at this point necessarily.
Thank you, Dan. Go ahead, Daniel.
It probably doesn't surprise you, I come from a suburban edge community, so I completely agree with what you're asking for. I was just checking, Lakeville and Forest Lake are very similar in terms of our distance from the urban, from the urban core. And we're probably 10, 15 years ahead of you in terms of development, but I appreciate what you've explained in terms of, I think the thing we lose sight of is that modern development is a lot different than it used to be. There was a time you'd look at these wetlands and you would drain them and you'd build houses on them. So we approach development in a very different way now, which creates situations like you've got where you've only got half a parcel that's usable for this. So I appreciate, in Lakeville, we've got 750 storm water ponds that are various degrees of public and non-public ownership. So it's a significant thing for us. It's how the community has grown developed, but I appreciate, well, and I just, on behalf of communities like ours, I appreciate your bringing this forward, because I think it's a good point. I was not here when the discussions went on the increasing the 3 to the 3.5, so I don't have that perspective necessarily, but appreciate your information.
Thank you, Daniel. Lana?
I have a question, and it's more just a general question. I know Sean asked about averaging across plats, and you said Forest Lake doesn't do platting. What are the requirements, or what are the conditions where a community is platted and not platted?
Well, we do plat our developments, we're just not a part of the Met Council's plat monitoring program.
Okay, so then what is the difference between being part of it and not part of it?
That's a great question. Communities that participate in the plat monitoring program submit their plats that they approve on an annual basis, and we can have staff come and talk about the full program in a future meeting as well. But I'll give a high-level summary. And the council reports on that annually as well, of what communities are planning across the region, helps us stay on top of development trends in the suburban edge, as well as one of our goals of ensuring that we have a consistent 20-year rolling land supply within our urban service area. So we can see how quickly land is developing or being planted even before houses are built upon them. We also review for things like consistency with the locally authorized comprehensive plan and ensure that plats are connected with that. For local governments that participate in the program, then they can also receive credit for when they are platting above the required densities. So if, for example, if the minimum density is 3.5 units per acre, and they have a series of plats already approved in the program that are at 4 units an acre, then they're able to average that already approved development with lower density over time and have that credit applied to them. Communities elect to participate in this program. They're not required to do that, and it's certainly something that would be available to the city in this case as well.
And the choice of electing not to versus to participate, what's a pro-con for a city? Why do you choose not to?
I'm not entirely, couldn't say for sure, because most communities in the metro area that are in that suburban edge do participate in the program. Only a handful of communities do not. I think, just the annual reporting part of submitting plats is, just it's a burden, so sometimes that can be a lot for small communities or a community that might only have one staff person who does all the planning. So just one of those things to consider, but when you're trying to, weigh those benefits, that's certainly a local government decision.
Thank you, Lana. Any other questions?
Sure, can I just add something? Mr. Rowe mentioned about that per acre. Forest Lake is one of the wettest areas of the metro. I mean, the wetlands are considerable. We straddle 2 watersheds, Rice Creek and Lake Comfort Forest Lake watershed. The Lake Comfort Forest Lake watershed arguably is probably one of the most stringent watersheds in the state, requiring massive buffers. So not only the wetland, but you have these buffers that we're working with, and that is going against what we're trying to do here as well, to make that density.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No? I just want to take a moment and say thank you, Abby, thank you, Amanda, Mayor Roberts, for making time coming here and just giving the LUAC the opportunity to begin with to listen to what your concerns are, right? I'm newly appointed to being the chair of the LUAC committee, but one of the main things I wanted to do is be able to listen to the different voices that we have from all the communities, because one thing doesn't fit in every single community, right? As you stated, the density requirement previously was going to be 4 units, right, for your current classification, right? I listened to my community, and my community is in Andover, Anoka. That's what I cover, right? I listened to the issues that they were having, brought it forth to the council. We talked about it with other council members, and we had those conversations, which is why that density dropped down from the 4 to 3.5. And that's why I looked forward to serving here in the LUAC and listening to the different areas that represent the Twin Cities, just to get the different perspectives that everybody has, because it's not gonna work in Forest Lake, it's not gonna work in Andover, it's not gonna work in different sections, but we need to find a way to come together and continue to move forward, because just like you in any other city, you don't wanna stop growing. You wanna continue, it's in the best interest for everybody in Forest Lake and the communities nearby. So just thank you for making the time, coming here, presenting this. We will review it, we will have conversations in regards to it. And thank you for having faith here in the Luwaks to listen to you and hear you out. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. All right, up next, we have the demonstration of the existing housing data interactive tool. Maya Guerrero?
Maya.
Maya.
I'm doing a live demo, so I gotta get hooked up. All right. Okay. Perfect. Well, good evening. Thank you all for having me here today. My name is Maya Guerrero Combs. I'm a planning analyst in the Community Development Division on the Housing and Livable Communities team. And so today I'm really excited to show you one of the housing technical assistance tools that the Met Council has been developing to support local governments in completing their 2050 local comprehensive plans. And that tool is called the Local Housing Data Tool. Great. So just as a little background before we dive into the tool, I want to provide some context about which of the 2050 housing minimum requirements the Local Housing Data Tool will provide technical assistance on. So as you can see, the 2050 housing minimum requirements are divided into 3 distinct sections. I'm not going to go into them today, but I did want to point out that the Local Housing Data Tool provides assistance for the existing housing needs portion of the minimum requirements. So the existing housing needs portion of the minimum requirements asks local governments to complete an existing housing data assessment in which local governments provide data on existing conditions of housing and households in their city or township. So we do have a list of minimum required specific identified data points, but we encourage cities to go beyond the minimum required data. And so in order to make things easier for local government staff, we provide all the minimum required data. So, before we develop this tool to provide this housing data to cities, we aim to learn from the 2040 process. So in 2040, the Met Council provided the minimum required data in a PDF format that then never got updated throughout the decade. It just lived on our website. And so while this got the data into the hands of local governments, it became pretty evident that some improvements could be made. So in spring of 2025, the Met Council conducted a series of user feedback sessions for the 2040 local planning handbook website and materials. And one of the key feedback areas that we heard was that the housing element technical assistance experience overall was lacking and needed to improve. And then specific to the existing housing data assessment, so that PDF, we heard that the PDF format was clunky, hard to copy and paste values from a PDF. There was no clear direction on how the data in the PDF related to the minimum requirements. We also heard it wasn't clear why these data points were important or connected to housing policy or planning. And finally, we heard that this data is really useful, right? And especially beyond comprehensive planning. And so how could it be updated on a regular basis? So, and then additionally, actually, Met Council staff did a review of 2040 comprehensive plans to identify what local governments ended up actually putting in their comp plans. And so we identified that most local governments went beyond the minimum required data points and included things like trend data, so data over time, visualizations, and other common data points like age of housing stock and more. So we took all of that
We took all that feedback and we developed the local housing data tool. So the local housing data tool is an interactive web-based tool that provides data, visualizations, and context for the existing conditions of housing and households at the local level to help local governments complete their 2050 minimum requirements and more. The interactive allows users to quickly download both the minimum required data as well as additional contextual data quickly and in a spreadsheet format. The local housing data tool also allows users to explore this data in the context of county and regional values, look at trends over time, and it has explanations of how to interpret the data to identify various housing needs for their community. The tool will also plug into our housing toolkit. How many times am I gonna say tool today? Which will be launched later this year. So we're hoping by the end of summer 2026. That toolkit will have suggested strategies and actions that local governments can take to meet the housing needs in their community. So without further ado, let me share my screen and we'll dive into it. In the interest of time, I'm not gonna go over every chart that's in the data tool, but I do wanna give you an overview of how you can download the data, what kind of data is in the tool, and where you can find the tool. So this is the landing page for the local housing data tool. As you can see, we have a banner that the tool is still under construction. That just means that we're generating feedback and adding more features as time goes on. At the bottom of this page, we have a description of what the tool does and does not do, and also when the tool data was last updated. We expect to update the data annually, so probably every spring, although things can sometimes be variable depending on other data sources, like federal data. So to begin downloading and exploring data, you're gonna click the Get Started with Your Municipality. I picked Apple Valley for this example, so just random city. And you're gonna press go. Oh.
Is this available at the county level?
So this is, in the name, it is particular to the locality that you are picking. For that locality, it does have county comparison data. So we'll get into it. So a lot of the interactives, you can click a switch and see how your local government compares to the same trends at the county level for your county. So if you're a city in Dakota County, it would show Dakota County. There are a few cities in our region that love to be in 2 counties. For those cities, it would show the county that they are mostly located in. And then the downloaded data has all the county data. So the spreadsheet has all the county data as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So once you select your area, it'll take you to this download data page. You can click this button, and I'm not gonna wait for it to load, but it'll take you to this landing page where there's another button that'll get you to this spreadsheet. So this spreadsheet has all of the data that's in the tool. It has 4 tabs, including a instructional tab on how to use the data, the tab of just the minimum required data points that are in the local government's minimum requirements, and then all the supplemental data that's in the tool, and then a final tab that goes over where this data is coming from and how we calculate it. So going back to the tool or the download data page, if you would like to also explore the data, so this is for people who are like, I know what I want to just go to the spreadsheet, download it. Some people really like to explore and dive in with visualizations. You have these tabs that can take you to different topic areas. They're also replicated at the top and the bottom of each page. On this page, there's also an explanatory section going over how to use the interactive features, but I'll go over that live with you all today. So let's start with housing stock. So the first tab, on the top of each tab, there's these buttons that can take you to specific topic areas. And then, so I'll go over housing stock first. So the housing stock page, some of the interactives have these little toggles that will then show you the same data, but in different formats. So for those who are maybe like to see things in tables versus visuals, you can see that. If a chart has a minimum requirement data point in it, there is this pop-up that'll come up tell you exactly what that minimum required data point is and which data within that chart would meet that, and you would just X out. There's also a button here to export the charts, so all these beautiful charts, you could export it and just plug it straight into your comp plan. That is a coming soon feature, so we're working with our GIS team to make sure that that works fully with our interactive, so coming soon. On the housing stock page, we have housing units by type of housing, so townhomes, multifamily, single family detached, etc. You'll notice that there's description, so this is a lot of narrative to describe how these data points can be important to the community. And at the bottom of each section, you'll see the suggested local housing needs and action section. So this is the portion that's gonna plug into our housing toolkit. So this will be identified needs that this data could tell, in this case, Apple Valley, that they might wanna focus on. And then the link to the toolkit will take you to different actions and strategies that could be used to mitigate those needs. So also on the housing stock page is new permitted housing units by type, and age of housing stock. Moving to housing stock affordability, this is gonna have all housing units broken out by affordability in recognized area median income bands. You're gonna break out all housing units by either if they're ownership or rental. We also dive deep into rental affordability, including vacancy rates by bedroom size and average asking rents. We dive into ownership housing, breaking that out by affordability as well as median sales prices. And here, this is where you can compare to county data. Sorry, I preloaded it before but you can jump in and compare it to county data. The permitted housing units by affordability and then dedicated affordable housing. The next tab is gonna focus on households and demographics. So this is gonna be, you're gonna have households broken out by race and ethnicity, by age, average household size, households by income levels, and so we could see. You can show county and local to do some comparisons by tenure, so whether the household owns or rents their home, by affordability, a deep dive into households who rent, including renter households by age. We have some data around older households in the region, households living with a disability, and households facing housing insecurity. And then the next tab is gonna be housing cost burden. So going over households that are cost burden, broken out by race and ethnicity. And this is another, you can click this and compare to county values. So here you can see how Apple Valley compares to Dakota County. Housing cost burden for households by age, whether they rent or own their home, lower income households, and then finally the last tab is going to be home ownership. So that's going to have home ownership rates and then data around opportunities for affordable home ownership within the city or township. So I tried to run through quickly because I know we have another item on the agenda, but I will stop sharing my screen here and go back to the slides to show you where to find this, because you're probably wondering, where is that? I want to play with it. If that's what I would be wondering. So I'm sure you're familiar with the local planning handbook website. So if you go to the local planning handbook website, there's the housing element page where you find the housing minimum requirements. Right there at the top is a big button called the local housing data tool, and that'll take you right to that landing page that I showed you at the beginning. Okay, and now, I don't know if there's any questions or comments.
Questions, comments? Lana, go ahead.
Thank you. I actually found this 2 weeks ago, and it's so fantastic. So then I have questions.
Yes.
How did you source your data?
Yes, so a lot of it is actually the CD, Community Development Research Team, collects an amazing amount of data at the regional and local level, really above and beyond any other region in the United States. So we fully get every building permit that happens in all 188 cities and townships and then break them out by affordability. So this is Met Council data that we calculate every year at a really precise level, and it's really impressive.
And how frequently do you update your data? So for instance, in our city, houses sell very fast
Mm-hmm.
and they sell sometimes so much above asking price. So obviously, too much of that, and you're really gonna have a change in what that data is, but how often are you refreshing your data?
Yes, so this tool will be refreshed once a year. I would say a majority of our data sources are refreshed once a year. Some of the data does come from the American Community Survey data, which is federal level, not as reliable. That being said, even though we update this once a year, it's a year behind, right? So when we get permits, so right now we're in 2026, we completed our building permit survey and got all those building permits for 2025, right? So we're releasing 2025 data in 2026. So there is a lag and I understand that the housing market moves quickly. And so we're really trying to update it as often as we can, but we are limited by how often we can survey cities. I'm sure they don't want us asking once a month or something like that. Yeah,
It's great too.
thanks.
Excellent.
Any other questions? Dan, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so is this gonna put out of business all those consultants that cities hire to give us all the data on housing? Or at least
Lips
to
are
make their jobs
sealed.
easier? They can charge us less. No, it was fantastic.
It's sweet graphics, boy, you can really understand.
Nobody else? All right. Thank you, Maya.
Yep, thank you so much.
Nice.
Yes. All right, last but not least, we got the flexible development guidelines updates. Mackenzie, yes.
Let me get this out of the way.
Hello, I'm Mackenzie Young-Walters, Senior Planner with Local Assistance. I'll see if I can be faster than my colleague. But we're here to talk a little bit about a proposed update to the Flexible Development Guidelines. I do really want to stress before we get into it, this is an incredibly high-level overview. Metropolitan Council is just beginning to kick off this work. So I would take this as a broad vision for what we're looking to do with the project. When I eventually come back with developed proposals, they may look significantly different than what you're going to talk about today. Some of that will be in response to feedback we get from you today, and the rest will be from feedback we're going to get from cities as we reach out, conduct focus groups, and begin to dig into this topic. But just to kind of frame up our conversation, I'm going to go into some of the background behind the Flexible Development Guidelines, talk about the current guidelines, and then, as I mentioned, talk about some of those potential areas that we're looking to maybe change or explore and see what we can do with, and then as well as outline our next steps for this process. So to give a little high-level context, we really divide the region at a very big level into two major policy areas. One is the urban service area, which is actively connected to the regional sewer system, and the rural service area, which is by and large not. Rural centers are generally on their own systems, so they're kind of a unique thing because they develop at urban densities, but they don't factor too much into this conversation. So I don't know how great this map is. Next time I will draft a GIS professional. This is my best attempt. If you look at the areas where there's the X's, that's the 2050 MUSA. So those are the areas that are considered to be in the urban service area. These are our developed communities and areas maybe that they have under an orderly annexation agreement where they've shown us they're planning to have their forecasted growth in the next 20 years. If you look where there's just a straight slashed line, that's our long-term service area. So the long-term service area is areas where we eventually expect to have urban services, but it's not in the near term, it's not in this 20-year planning period. Some of these areas, you know, if you look out to the southernmost chunk of Scott County, we may be talking 80 years out. You know, this is the extremely long, full build out of the regional system. So Our current policy as it relates to the rural service area, which is what we're gonna be talking about mostly today, and the long-term service area within it, is to manage growth in a way that directs the growth towards the urban areas and leaves the opportunity for future development at efficient levels possible in the rural area. We do that through two tools. One of which is in the rural service area, with the exception of rural centers, we have density maximums. So for the kind of light green diversified rural, that's 4/40. For the dark green agriculture, that's 1/40. And then we have the rural residential, that's kind of a green in between those two colors. Their policy is they can do basically 1 to 2.5 acre lots where that's the existing development pattern, or they should aim for 1/10. But those tend to be areas that had developed before we had the flexible development guidelines. Which brings me into our second major policy tool for managing growth in the rural area, and that's the flexible development guidelines. A little bit of history here is about in the early 2000s, there was a ton of development pressure. So we were seeing a lot of rural properties subdivide and have that rural residential lot style, 1, 2.5 acre lots in the rural areas. And partially in recognition of this, we formed a rural issues working group in 2006. One of the big things that came out of that working group was we found out that there was a need to allow for some development in response to this development pressure. But there was also a very critical need to make sure that the development that was happening was not happening in a way that would make it impossible for us to efficiently expand the regional system in the future. It's very difficult to economically serve a bunch of 1.5 acre lots. The math just doesn't work very well. And it can make it hard then to efficiently develop the properties beyond them because you have to run sewer past that area. So in 2008, after literally a couple years of work, the council adopted the current flexible development guidelines. And what they said was that within the diversified rural category, within the long-term service area, cities could do cluster developments, and the main rule of thumb was that the ordinance had to be designed with the intention of allowing for future extension of urban services at densities that would be efficient and economical. So at the time, 3 units an acre was the standard that was for that. And we required that 25% of the land could develop and the other 75% developable land need to be reserved for that future development. And we had a bunch of language there on how they could show that through ghost plats, using deed restrictions, things of that nature. Those guidelines have not been altered since their adoption, so they're 18 years old at this point. One of the things that the Met Council committed to do in Imagine 2050 was to take another look at this guideline and see how effective it's been. We now have 18 years of data, so we can look at how the rural area has been developing under these guidelines. If they've been successful in serving their intended purpose, where there may have been areas where they can be improved, best practices that we've seen come out of these guidelines, and then also if there's other ways that we can expand or alter these guidelines to further advance our policy. So with that in mind, our very preliminary things that we're going to be looking at is, of course, the first goal of the guidelines, which are the sole focus of the current guidelines, which is how can we accommodate development within the long-term service area. And that's where we're getting into what I was talking about, where we're really gonna look at what's been successful for communities, where we've seen areas maybe not develop as we would have hoped, try to figure out what's going on there, how we can strengthen these guidelines to give better guidance to communities on how they can manage development in these areas in a way that's gonna allow for us to efficiently expand, us and them, to efficiently expand services in the future. So we'll be looking at the requirements associated, percentage of land preserved for future development, what types of systems are appropriate, what type of density is appropriate, and those type of things. The other aspect is generally managing rural growth. Every year, not every year, but every decade, we forecast growth for our rural service area, much less than our urban service area, but we do acknowledge that these areas do grow. So one of the things we wanna look at is, are there ways that maybe we can direct this growth into more desirable areas that would have lower environmental impacts? And if so, if there's guardrails that we would need to enact to make sure that we're not running into policy inconsistencies or inadvertently creating a pattern of growth that might lead to us needing to extend urban services to an area we had not planned to and where we cannot serve it efficiently. So this is something that we're gonna investigate. I honestly don't know where it's gonna land, but it's a question I think that's worth asking. And part of that managing rural growth kind of falls into two subcategories. One is preserving environmental systems. So, is there a way that we can use the flexible development guidelines to encourage our rural service area to preserve high quality environmental resources by, moving development away from that in exchange for permanent preservation? Is that a mechanism we can use that we can do in a way that's not gonna run into those risks with like a proliferation of large lot estate style development that, could end up not having adequate backup septic systems and things like that? Similar question for preserving agricultural areas. Imagine 2050 talks a lot about the importance of preserving our prime farmlands. Is there a way that we can reduce development pressure on those areas, allow for that land to stay in productive use while acknowledging, the potential need to maybe break off a homestead for a kid or something like that? So these are gonna be things that we'd like to investigate, do research on, and determine whether or not it's a viable use for the guidelines. The final aspect of the update, and this will happen regardless of the answer to the previous questions, is of course technical assistance for communities. Once we determine what the updated flexible development guidelines will be covering, we're gonna be developing resources to help communities determine what needs to be in their comprehensive plan to take advantage of the guidelines, to demonstrate consistency with the guidelines. We'll also have to create resources explaining the guidelines, and then we'd like to promulgate best practices we've noticed as we look at what cities are currently doing under the existing flexible development guidelines. And our plan to do that is to start off by analyzing the information we have on rural development trends. So again, we're gonna really look at how these areas have developed between 2008 and the present, where we're seeing a proliferation of larger lots, where we're seeing, the type of cluster development that the guidelines support for communities that have adopted them. Essentially do an audit. How has this program been working for the last 18 years? We're gonna be doing interviews with the counties that have land use authority, so Scott and Carver, as well as communities that have been using these guidelines or maybe haven't, to figure out how they've been handling rural development, what they've seen, what's working, what's not, what they would like to see in an update. From then, we'll do a broader focus group. Once we have some ideas to bounce off them, we'll take that input, we'll refine it, and we'll bring stuff back to LUAC for additional input and to move forward with updating them. And then we'll build the technical assistance. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. As I said, this is fast, this is a high level overview, but we wanted it to be on your radar and give you a little background for when we came back with this.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Chair, maybe you can answer this, or anybody can answer this question. Does the Met Council, like in Forest Lake, the cost of running your pipes out to Forest Lake, is that part of why you insist on higher density to pay for the pipes? Is that how that works? It is? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's, okay. I mean, do you ever get back enough to pay for that cost of running those pipes like that far out or something?
Yeah, so, I think the testament to the effectiveness of the council's density policy has been the fact that your SAC charges really have not changed, and somebody with a better memory can tell me how long, but it's been,
Several years.
yes.
This year though.
Is it?
But
Yeah.
they're the lowest, among the lowest in the nation.
Yeah, we consistently have one of the most affordable regional systems. Prices are, the SAC rate is the same for Minneapolis and for Forest Lake, and the reason we can afford to do that is because of the council's density policy. We make sure that it is efficient for us to serve every community, and that's the impetus for why, in the long-term service area, we care about how that rural area develops, because even though it's not currently on our system, these are all areas that we're eventually gonna have to serve. And if it's broken up in, say, a bunch of 5-acre lots, it's insanely hard for those to subdivide in a way that allows for that efficient extension of service to continue.
Well, if you put in a big apartment building, let's say a 150 unit apartment building, who pays the Met Council for the use of their pipes? Is that part of the unit's rent that the owner of the apartment pays on his property taxes, or
Yeah, so there's
water bills, or what?
Yep, so there's the SAC charge that's assessed when it connects to our system. That covers our bill. I would assume most developers are building that into their pro forma, and then, that's divided out through the revenue they're gonna need to be generating for the lease space over the expected lifetime of the project. So, just like everything else, the developer's gonna make themselves whole. And that's one of the reasons why we try so hard to keep that SAC rate as affordable and as efficient as possible, to not drive up housing costs as that's passed on to the end user.
And Chair, if I could add one thing. Chair and committee members, just one thing in addition to what Mackenzie was talking, he was talking about the regional SAC charges. There are also local SAC charges to offset the costs for the local infrastructure that extends to actually connect to the regional system. So the regional system goes so far, and then the local government takes over within developments. Those are local pipes. The huge force mains and interceptors, those are ours. So there's a local SAC rate that the local government determines the extent of that charge to recoup some of the local costs as well. We're only responsible for the regional one.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know that you mentioned that 2008 really sort of kicked off, and that you were also looking at forecasting growth. Did that occur in 2008? And if so, I'm just curious how close your forecasts are now, looking back at that point.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I don't have those numbers in that comparison off the top of my head. I do know that, we've started the analysis. There have been lots platted and homes developed in the rural area from 2008 to present. How closely that aligned to the council forecast from 2008, I don't have that information available at the moment.
Chair, I would just offer, over the many decades that we've been doing forecasting, by and large, we're pretty accurate. So we're not 100% on the number, but we are within a very close range of forecasting generally.
Go ahead, Chris.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councilor. Is that, so where, when you say very close, is that in the 95% range, or is it more like a 75%?
I would say that's probably close.
Okay.
Yeah, we're pretty darn good
Yep.
at forecasting.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I track you and the state demographer, and Met Council is more accurate in the last 2 decades.
Go ahead, Dan.
So just to clarify too, as far as when we look at this, does this apply both to areas that might come into the Met Council system, as well as areas that are adjacent to rural centers that have their own systems, that we're also trying to make sure that there isn't something, 2 miles out of town that's gonna have to be served by that system, and there's, and there isn't enough density in between, as an example?
Yeah, so I went back to my map, but you can see, for instance, Elko New Market in the southeast of Scott County, right? You can see the long-term service area line around the city. And so, in theory, if Scott County wanted to adopt the flexible development ordinance, they could do that and implement it around Elko New Market to allow for controlled growth in a way that would allow Elko New Market to expand. I picked the worst one. That is the one rural center that's actually on our regional system.
Yeah.
I apologize. Let's. Oh, excellent. But if you look at our other rural centers.
A fictional place called Mooseco Old Market.
But I love my brain. Yeah, Belle Plaine or Jordan. The other 2 rural centers in Scott County have the same pattern where you can see the long-term service area extends around them. So
if it's a rural center that doesn't have that long-term area extending around them, this doesn't really factor into those communities then?
It wouldn't, but I believe with the vast majority of them do. Scandia doesn't. Scandia is a unique situation in terms of its classification as a rural center. But almost all of them will have a long-term service area around them, and
I just couldn't see it very well.
yeah, I know. Again, I promise I'll get an actual GIS professional to do work next time. I'm an enthusiastic amateur at best.
Thank you for clarifying.
Go ahead, Bill.
Just two suggestions. If at a future meeting, you could maybe provide the accuracy of the last 30 years on what the Met Council forecasted, just for the education of everyone here at the table. I think it'd also be helpful if you'd say sample SAC charges, 3 different areas for especially apartment buildings, townhomes, what the builder's paying, and if you have city SAC charge also, I think it'd just be good. Oh, that is the primary reason density is so important in the urban area.
That's an important.
Thank you, Bill. That's right.
Well, I'm not doing it.
You asked the question.
If someone
That's a
else
start.
could.
Jerry.
Just out of my own information, do I understand the Met Council doesn't supply water to anybody, just water treatment? Is that correct? Is that, okay.
We don't provide water treatment.
Oh, so
Local governments have
Treat.
water, do the water supply. We do water supply planning.
forgive me, I heard
We
wastewater
do
treatment.
wastewater.
Yes.
Yeah, if you're talking about
Yeah,
wastewater, that's,
yeah.
yeah, no, Mackenzie, you're right. I thought you said.
No, it is a good clarification, because you will have water treatment plants that are part of the water supply infrastructure, which we are not involved in.
Go ahead, Christos.
Thank you. This is to echo Bill's comment, but one of the things that I think would be helpful too is over that time to see the net density changes. I mean, this comes back to our first presentation today of, well, is this really reasonable or manageable for us 20 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and seeing how that has sort of shifted over time throughout the metro area. I think, and I don't know how that graph looks. I'm not the one in creating it, but I think it'd be really helpful to understand that sort of trend over history, and seeing why, with the 95% or so projections, that's where we're going, and this is what we thought then, and this is what we see now, and that's why this is legitimate, for communities to plan for. So.
Thank you, Christos. Go ahead, Jerry.
Got another question. After World War II, I mean, cities like Ridgefield, Bloomington, Hopkins, I don't know all the other, it seemed like housing was small and very together. Does anybody know how many units that make up made per acre?
Well, I can speak to Hopkins because I lived there, I did the math for my own neighborhood. And, my neighborhood clocks in at a little over 6 units an acre if you apply the current Met Council methodology, more or less. And I think kind of you'll see in a lot of the historic, what we consider urban core single family, you're probably pushing at 5 to 8, somewhere in that range would be fairly typical. You're getting 5,000 to 6,000 square foot lots, alleys, much narrower road right away than the 60-foot right away that Forest Lake was mentioning, and that all plays a role. Usually did not do stormwater management, which can cause problems now, but so it goes.
That's when they were filling in the wetlands.
Yeah.
And realistically, it'd be almost impossible to duplicate that scenario in today's markets or whatever, today's going on. I don't know how many people want that small of a house, because they have at least probably 2 cars, lawnmowers, boats.
You would actually be surprised to find out the newer generation, like me personally, if I were to buy my own house that I live in now, I wouldn't be able to afford it. Right, so the newer generation, the people that are coming up, they're not looking for 2, 3, 4, 5 acres. They're looking to move into somewhere that they can actually afford, close enough to the amenities that they want for their family, and that's all they care about. the times are changing and the prices are drastically increasing. I mean, I think the average price per home right now is about, what, $348,000, right? The average income in a lot of the areas is still $65,000 a year. That's not enough money to buy, so you have to be able to build smaller to build more affordable housing.
Well, wasn't there something in the legislature this year, they didn't want real small houses, no basements, no nothing? Wouldn't that increase then the density? That would, Met Council would like that then, right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think you're talking about allowing ADUs?
The ADUs.
I don't know, I don't
I think
remember
that's-
what it was called, but they were a push to, it'd be just a simple, small house, no basements, no nothing. That way more people could afford to buy their house. So that would have been something the Met Council would have pushed, right? To get higher density then?
Chair and committee members, the Met Council doesn't necessarily push for that kind of a specific development. We push for policies that allow for a variety of housing types, different uses within different neighborhoods. Higher density does help with the regional sewer service, and it's a more efficient and a cost-effective way to provide region-wide services. But we don't tell communities like what housing type they must do. Not townhouses, not tiny homes, not apartment complexes. We provide that higher level guidance, and the local government turns that into what works for their communities.
Go ahead, Bill.
Just a quick comment on what you were commenting on is the median house price. New homes, I was just at a seminar this morning with builders. You're pushing 400 grand for a 2-story townhome, 2-stall garage, 380 to 4. And single family homes, you're at $500,000 for a starter. So I didn't bring this up with Forest Lake, but the builders stayed there, and I'm assuming it's more affordable with the final design than if they took the whole 40 acres and made larger lots. And my other question would have been, is the market not buying what's being built based on our standards? That is really the pushback. If they're unreasonable, then we really need to modify certain things.
And to what you were talking about, Jared, about the ADUs, I think they were trying to make it so no cities could deny ADUs to be built on property.
Correct. It had to do with who has control over the housing.
Yep.
Locals or
Other
the
things
council or
besides
the state or something.
Yeah.
And I believe it didn't go anywhere, I believe. I haven't heard nothing.
It could have gone somewhere, I think, but it luckily, from some perspectives, it luckily didn't, because it removed a lot of restrictions on higher density development, where local communities couldn't have public hearings. They had to basically default approve things. So you couldn't hear from residents that might have concerns about density development and things like that. Not necessarily that, I think the idea was behind the legislation, not to get down into a soapbox here, but the idea was that the perception was that everybody that's in communities that comes to the hearings is all opposed to apartments and you can't build any apartments. And I think all the communities in this area have demonstrated that that hasn't actually been the case. And so I think that the problems with the legislation were a lot of removal of local control over decision making, ADUs being one, high density residential being another. There were a lot of them. So there was some pushback on the legislation just because it was one size fits all.
Go ahead, Alana.
I have a question, and this is just more my lack of knowledge, but when you're doing your long-term planning and you talk about some of those being agriculture or environmental set-asides, that kind of presumes current financial moving forward, but let's say in a rural area where maybe your ag is starting to have some financial risk, and ag property wants to turn over and become sellable to something that can make up a larger profit on the land, that's not all within your control and your purview. So is is your long-term planning really 80 years? As markets change and as data centers and other things come in, that could utilize that land in a different way, what's your at-risk mitigation around, you can't control all those financial factors?
Right, well, I threw 80 years out there as a very, soft number just to show that the long-term service area is very long-term, how far out we think the system will expand. Our planning is done in a 10-year cycle. So, just like when Imagine 2050 came in, we looked at the assumptions under Thrive 2040 and we recalibrated, we changed some community designations. If you put over a MUSA map, you'd see the MUSA moved a little bit in areas, some stuff, what moved from the MUSA to the long-term service area or whatnot. And come whatever the 2060 plan is, we'll also be recalibrating at that point. We also do amendments throughout the process, so if a city does come forward and if you look at the Dakota County, you'll see some areas that are guided for ag right now are in the long-term service area. If those cities have a development proposal and they annex the land and extend their system and we agree it's viable to extend the MUSA, et cetera, then that would flip to suburban edge. So it is an iterative and responsive process. And every 10 years it gets a really thorough overlook, but we also do more incremental modifications. My last soapbox point is, one of the things that we use the regional policy for in the rural service area is to try to reduce that development pressure on the lands. And that's where that 1/40 is so important, because if you can only get one lot on that 40 acres, it really lowers the sell price and the incentive for that to develop as something else. I think, one of the things I'd like to explore in these guidelines is there a way we could allow, an individual who needs to retire or cash out to take that 1/40 and keep the rest of the land in productive use if there's a possibility for that? Because once stuff, develops, then it's gone for agriculture.
Can I ask one more question then? So the sale happens and it becomes a different classification that then puts that land use into the minimum requirements of that new classification then, correct?
Sorry, are we?
So let's say some of this rural land is sold and it becomes a different classification like suburban edge or whatever. That puts that land into the requirement of that zone.
Yep, so like if, if that 1/40 is annexed into the city and the city extends its, land use authority over it and assigns it a land use of say 3 to 6 units per acre like Forest Lake was talking about, then that's it, and it goes into the city's density calculations, and then the city community-wide with that new land plus all the land they currently have guided to accommodate their growth have to hit the 3.5 units per acre. So once the city picks it up, it flips into that policy category, if that makes sense.
I have more of a general question about flexible development guidelines. Are they kind of an appendix to Imagine 2050 where they're like inspiring or requiring communities to adopt coordinates updates, or is it more of a toolbox, if you will, that where communities, if they want to do cluster style development, this is how you do it, versus having it be a requirement?
Yeah, much more the latter. So the flexible development guidelines are a policy that communities can utilize if they're interested in doing, development of this type in these areas. Imagine 2050, I believe, requires that, I believe the text is that, communities using these have to demonstrate their compatibility with the flexible development guidelines in their 2050 comp plan. So if, a community decides, yep, we wanna do these type of cluster developments, in the areas that we're not quite ready to serve yet, but we have development interest in, they would need to adopt an ordinance that met the requirements of the flexible development guidelines, and then in their comprehensive plan, basically tell us, here's how we're meeting it, see our ordinance.
Okay, so if they did want to do the cluster style development, they would need to follow the guidelines, or it would need to be consistent with the guidelines?
Yep, absolutely, and that's because within the long-term service area especially, it potentially has an impact on our regional system if we can't extend it where we've always planned to extend it because development created a collar of, 2.5 acre lots that walls it off.
Any more questions for Mackenzie? No. Thank you very much, Mackenzie.
Thank you, look forward to future conversations.
Same. All right, seems like we have nothing else. Angela, anything for the group?
Nothing for the group, we'll follow up with some of these to-dos in the future.
All right, meeting is adjourned. So,
Just gonna